All right, welcome to Authentic Confidence. I'm your host, Ben Fauske, and today we have a very, very special guest, one of my close friends. He is the superintendent of Kaukauna Area School District, and he is a phenomenal leader, has done amazing things in the district already, and so excited to have him. Welcome, Mr. Mike Slowinski. Welcome, Mike, to the podcast.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Ben. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so tell us, Mike, education, right? It's not an easy industry to be in these days. There's some division around it. There's excitement around it. There's highs and lows around it. So how did education work for you? Did you always know you wanted to be in the educational field, or kind of talk us through what it was like growing up?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of educators, both my parents were teachers. So my dad was a band director here in Kaukauna, actually, for 30 years. And then my mom was a band director in Appleton. So education was always something that was around my life, but it wasn't necessarily something that I thought I was going to do growing up. When I went to college, I initially went thinking I was going to be a chiropractor.
Really?
And, yeah. Just was fascinated with that field. And that was my intent. I started off as a biology major, but as I got into my coursework, just ran into a few teachers who were kind of those seminal people in my life that helped me understand, the power of being able to read and write and communicate, and how you can explore ideas and change the world through that. And they just also happened to be in the education space at the college. And so I just kind of became naturally drawn to that, and ended up following that passion all the way through.
Well, it's interesting. So I've done obviously a lot of executive leadership work, coaching work, and I always tell educators when I'll ask executives mid-career, end of their career, tell me who's had the most impact on your life. And it's almost always, Mrs. Jansen in fourth grade was the first one who actually believed in me. And she said things to me that I weren't totally sure about, but I acted on them and changed my life. And I always tell teachers, it's an unfair fight. I'm pretty good at what I do. I've gone through a lot of training. I take my work really, really seriously. But when it comes to the greatest impact, people don't ever say, oh, yeah, Ben Fauske was the greatest impact I've ever had in my life. I'm still waiting. Maybe someday I'll get that. But people almost always say it was an educator, it was a coach, it was someone in the school district that really spoke to me in a way. So why is that? Parents obviously have an impact, relatives, grandparents, but why do you think it is educators that have this supernatural ability to speak truth? And obviously the topic is confidence, right? They can instill a confidence that other areas, physicians, other industries, chiropractors, typically, what makes teachers so powerful? What makes that dynamic so interesting?
I mean, that's a great question. And, I think part of it is that we just have this unbelievable opportunity in this industry to spend a tremendous amount of their students' lives with them, and we get to see them in their social spheres. We get to see them as they're navigating challenges. We have the opportunity to provide them with all different types of experiences that tap into their passion and their struggles, their fears and hopes and dreams. And I think when you go through those experiences, the greatest teachers have the ability to recognize the strengths and the genius that they see, and maybe for the first time in that student's life, and then articulate that. And it's my story would be exactly the same, and I think about like some of the greatest influences in my life, and one of them being my basketball coach in high school, Coach Milky. He was the first person who ever articulated that he felt like I had leadership potential. And I distinctly remember the conversation. I was a junior in high school. He had pulled me aside and he told me, I see you as a tremendous leader. And it changed the entire way that I looked at myself. And, I look back at that moment, and everything after that became kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? somebody thought that I was a leader. So now I start to question, am I a leader? And then I experiment a little bit more into other leadership opportunities, and it kind of snowballs on itself until you build up this, collection of experiences and wisdom and all of the things that come with taking risks and building your confidence and believing in yourself, until one day you turn around and you're like, oh, this is who I became. And I just think like educators, they're in such a great position to be able to do that. And it takes intentional effort. It takes some leaders who understand that half of the power of what being a leader is identifying that genius and articulating it to people, and then letting them run with that, and reinforcing.
Well, and I think that's so well said. And the best that I've ever seen, they also recognize the moment. Like there's moments, like, in other words, maybe that coach could have said that to you in the wrong moment. You had a rough game and he's trying to cheer you up. And he's like, oh, you'll be a leader someday or something, But the best, their genius is recognizing the moment. And so many times I think back in my life where it was, for me, it was similar. I had a wrestling coach, Coach Peterson, and he said, I had a sort of, was a wrestler. I was okay. And he said to me, he pulled me aside. He said, you're going to be one of the best wrestlers we've ever had. And I'm like, I'm like, I'm like 100 pounds. I'm a freshman. I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm like, what? So there's something about the way he said it, when he said it. It's like the best educators, I think, they know that there are, you're with these kids all these hours, but they're really strategic about when to place it. And I think what happens then, right? You just mentioned to it. What happened to your confidence after he said that to you?
Yeah, I mean, in the moment, I don't know that it like exploded in terms of like going from level 1 to level 100, but I think it created a question that started to just build on itself in a really organic way. And it gave me the confidence to take risks in that area, because somebody recognized the leadership potential. Now, the next time that there's a situation where maybe I could speak up in a leadership capacity, I had more confidence to be able to take that risk, and then as people react to that, or I learn from that experience, it builds it on itself. And I just think like it's the spark, it's the thing that starts it. It's the, beginning of momentum. But I think too, when I think about what you're saying about the right moment, the other piece to that, I think, is the authenticity of it, and the best people are really authentic in the way that they deliver that feedback. It's not that they walk around and they say, well, I'm going to give a compliment to every single person I meet today. And it's really trying to, be real about, hey, this is something I've really thought about this. And this is something that I see in you. And I'm going to maybe give you a specific example of how I see that. So I think it becomes more real to the people that we're serving.
Well, and I think what I've always found too is students are so observant. Are we full of shit in what we say? Yeah. Do we, and our parents, many, right? We all have different parental experiences, but parents by and large are supposed to be our fans. They're supposed to say nice things to us. They don't always do that, but educators, they're not trained or paid to be nice to us. They're trained to educate us. They're paid to educate us. They're paid to provide an environment where learning can happen. So when they go out of their way to say something, and then typically it's funny, you'll see that student will observe this teacher and go, or this coach and go, do they do this to everyone? Do they really mean it when they say it? Do I hear them talk bad about people, behind closed doors, whatever? And then I think it compounds when you're like, no, this person's legit. This person does what they say they're going to do. And now they're like, okay, so now I have someone that I admire that believes in me. So I got a decision to make. Do I trust them? Do I believe them or not? And so I'm going to, I love what you said, is like you started to test. All right, well, I don't even know if I believe him yet, but let me test some leadership Let me be a leader in certain situations and see what happens. And obviously, what happened is people started following you. So how did that feel when it started working?
Yeah, it felt really validating, and I think almost like a different path opens up. Because you start to create a sense of your self identity and have some describers to characterize that. So now I started, earlier on looking at myself as Mike, a leader. And so what does Mike, a leader, do in this situation? And giving that language to that experience is what I think really allows you to be much more intentional about your path.
Yeah, and it's almost like we live up to and into that expectation. And, to me, what I love about the confidence work that we do is so much of it happens with how we describe ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to that, how would you have described yourself as a leader?
I wouldn't have.
Right.
Like I didn't think about it that way. It wasn't
Yeah.
even part of my worldview.
I'm Mike the basketball player.
Yeah.
Right. I'm
Yeah.
Mike the student. I'm Mike the son of two, band educators and music teachers. And, well, let's see what happens. And now all of a sudden you're confronted in a awesome way. You're a leader. And with that comes some responsibility and comes maybe some weight to that. And some, can I live up to this? Is this true? And now you start realizing, and now all of a sudden you're like, not only am I going to be an educator, but I'm potentially going to be a leader of educators. So when did that transition happen?
It's interesting. I think there's like the formal way that happens with positions and titles and things. And then I think there's the more informal ways of just how does somebody be a leader, even if the position isn't called something that's a leadership role. Right. And, I think when I first got to my first teaching position, I had a really amazing group of veteran teachers who were in my department who immediately gave me some ownership, some decision-making authority, and really kind of encouraged that. So it wasn't an environment that I stepped into that was like, okay, you have to follow what we've done because we've done this for 30 years. It was more of an environment of, hey, what new perspective are you bringing into this space? And how would you like to see this? Or if you were going to do it, what would that look like? And so I was given some opportunities early on in my career to navigate in a leadership space. And I think, in turn, those early experiences, whether it was the coach in high school, whether it was the college professor who, helped instill that passion, or those early educators that I worked with, what it helped me to understand is that my job as a leader isn't necessarily in a title or a formal role, but it's to look at other people and figure out how can we work to make them even better than they are, right? And how can we give them capacity and ownership in a really authentic way? And that's what leadership is. It's about building more leaders and helping people to live to their highest capacity to help make the world a better place.
Well, and I see you do that every day, Mike. So the fun part is, full disclosure, y'all, I have 4 daughters that have come through the district. I've been working with the district for many years, and I have seen firsthand Mike lead this way. And the reaction from the staff, to me, you can't fake that. I work with some leaders and like, oh yeah, I've got a great team, and then I show up. Well, your team doesn't think you're great. I can tell you that. You might think they're great, but it's not reciprocated because you can just feel the culture. And your time building a healthy culture at Kaukauna and truly making sure people are seen and heard. And there's evidence to that, right? So just passing a $198 million referendum in the district, the largest the district has ever seen. Staff engagement scores that are continuing to rise and go, really They're proud of the work that they do. And then student achievement continues to go up, both academically and athletically. You see people doing amazing things, and just the momentum that the district has. And you're leading it from a space, and this is what's crazy, is I'm in the community, so I ask around. To a person, everyone that I've talked to loves the direction of the district. And that doesn't happen. I mean, that, it's amazing to get that sort of alignment. So for those of that are out there listening to this, Mike, and maybe they've come into a district that's struggling and it's not going well at all, and they need to make a 180. Maybe they're coming into a district like you did. You came into a district that was doing well.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Kaukauna was making great strides before you came, and you're helping them get even to another level. And maybe people who aren't even in education, but just saying, give me some leadership advice, Mike. Help me understand, how do I get through some of these confidence challenges that I've had? Because I'm assuming you've had some confidence challenges. So maybe share with us one confidence challenge that you've had in your career, how you overcame it, and then what advice you'd have for people listening to our conversation today.
Yeah, I feel like, and a confidence challenge, I think, happens every day in leadership, and I think it often revolves around that fear of failure, or, the fear of judgment, right? Like, if you're making a decision, a leadership decision, especially if you're like thinking in your futuristic, innovative zone, you don't know what the right answer is. Like, you have to take some creative and calculated risks to achieve something new and great. And out of by definition, you don't know what the end result is going to be, and that's why it's risky. And I think that early on, especially in my career, as I was making decisions, you oftentimes shy away from that like moonshot thinking to try to get back into a safe zone of like, let's just take one really safe small step forward, because I know predictably what the end result is going to be, rather than, hey, I'm going to trust my gut and my bank of experiences that I have, and look at what's possible. And every time that I've taken that longer view and trusted my gut and thought of what's possible or what could go right versus what could go wrong, in the end, it's been rewarding. And I think, like, over time, as I've been able to make decisions, it's never been easy, but it becomes easier and easier, where I can have a bank of experiences to say, hey, remember last time that, this risk, I took this risk, or, we went into the unknown here, and look how it turned out. And I think that to me is one of the biggest lessons that I've learned in my leadership journey so far, because you do have that self-doubt, right? Like, if this doesn't go right, what does that say about me? If that referendum failed, what does that say about me? And don't think I didn't have that thought, right? Like, and I know that it's not fair. And we do that to ourselves all the time in leadership. We put ourselves into unfair thinking, and I think that we can get so far into our heads, getting into that mindset of fear of failure, that it can hold us back. And so I think, there's many different examples I could pull from, of times in my career that's happened. I think, the referendum being a recent one, though, that there wasn't a clear path. Our story in Kaukauna was really complicated for how do we set the district up for the future. And there are many, many different strong opinions in the community about how to do that. But ultimately, the place that we decided to land on, that of trusting the gut, was like, we're going to have as many possible people be a part of this journey and help create ownership from a community standpoint over this project. And from the beginning, we'll make sure that people know, like, that doesn't mean we're going to agree on every single decision that's made, but we're going to do the best job we possibly can, listening to the most amount of voices and putting something out in front of people that's the best representation of the values and priorities. And I think when I look back at the success of that effort, I think that there's an ownership right now in the community around the things that we're working on as a district. And people, by allowing people a place at the table to voice their opinion, I think it creates a coalition of people who are like, okay, I get why this decision was made or why, we put this out. But if we would have looked back at the beginning of the process and you would have told me, hey, you're going to put forward a nearly $200 million referendum in front of this community, I would have laughed at you and said, there's no way that's possible. But every step along the way, we were listening to what other people were telling us and following our best possible gut decision and holding that what's possible mentality as we look to the future.
Well, and not only did it pass, but it passed with a landslide. That's what was shocking to me. I'm like, okay, everybody I talked to was like, it's going to be, it could come down to the vote. And it really didn't. And that only happens if the community is like, we are behind this school district. Mm-hmm. And we're behind it in a way that maybe we have never been behind it in the past. And, when you think about, sort of how you got there, really, how many hours did you have of listening sessions and collaborations and really adjusting your plan based on what you were hearing from those around you? And I've seen that from you, that collaboration over and over again. What would you have done if it had failed?
We would have been going back to the drawing board. I don't think we would have changed the way we operate fundamentally. Like that idea of believing that the best way to move a group forward or best way to lead a group is to provide some level of clarity of direction, some level of, training or competence within that, and then give over the control, open the door and let people come in and be a part of it. And so we would have done the same thing. I think it's having the humility to say, okay, that wasn't the right solution. And we believe in our process. And so we're going to go back and have some more conversation with you to figure out what went wrong with this plan. What are some potential solutions moving forward? And how can we take another step forward, knowing that here are the issues that are inevitable that we need to resolve.
And here's what I love, Mike, about this, knowing and having been around you. It wouldn't have been, there would have been shock and there would have been the failure of the moment. But really great leaders are resilient and they know we're going to win some things, we're going to lose some things, we're going to succeed at something. As long as we've done the process well, as long as we've listened, as long as we've been humble, as long as we've put the vision forward, that's not a failure, right? And I know you well enough to know you'd have been like, yeah, we may have failed the referendum, but it wasn't an organizational failure. We presented what we believe is the vision to the community. The community said, no, we're going to find another approach at this. And I think in some ways that ability, where I see leaders and organizations struggle, is when they're out of desperation. Maybe the organization's in trouble. Maybe they're in financial trouble. And people start leading out of desperation and fear, like you mentioned before. Well, then the referendums don't pass because people don't want to give to something like, well, if we don't do this, the walls of the middle school are going to fall over tomorrow. And like you sort of almost present things out of this fear-based initiative. And I love, one of my favorite leaders said, when he's leading his organization, he said, we will no longer make decisions based out of fear. Fear will not be the determining factor of how our organization moves forward. We might make mistakes. We might not win everything. And it doesn't mean we're not aware of the risks, and it doesn't mean we're not aware of the impacts in the budget and the finances. We're aware of all those things. It's just the energy we bring to this conversation will not be fear. So what would you say is the energy that you brought to this referendum? What would you say is the emotion that you brought to this?
Well, I think it goes back to just a fundamental belief that what is unique about schools is that it's a place that a community comes together, and it's the place that we gather on Friday nights to watch a football game. It's the place that we go to, take in a show, or, there's so many different pride points in a community that revolve around our schools. And, you look at today's political landscape and just, the divisiveness and this idea that you either have to be here or you have to be here. Right. And I think that schools have this tremendous opportunity to be that intersection of a common point of pride and common storytelling within a community. And that is the energy that I believe that we brought to not just this effort, but our entire strategic plan, our core values, like our basic way of being in this community. You know, and behind me you see the "We Are Kaukauna" sign. I mean, that's what that's all about, is all of us play a role in our schools. All of us play, and you know, our schools, if they're strong, that also comes back and benefits the whole community, regardless of, you know, who you are, what your relationship to the community is. And I think when people, they want to be a part of something like that, I think just people naturally, as part of the human condition, yearn to be a part of community. And our schools are in such an awesome position to be a driver of that, a connector. And I think once you can tap into that within a community and build that pride, there's just no limit to what the possibilities are, you know, of what you can all accomplish together. So that to me is what I feel like was tapped into in this process. But it's such a like hopeful and energizing feeling, you know, not just for people who are part of the district in terms of employment, but I think, you know, when people are proud to be from Kaukauna and they can point to that as like, I was a part of that.
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I love it. And I think, you know, most organizations, my experience, that fail, it's not because the vision was too big, it's because it was too small.
Yeah.
People want to be a part of something exciting. People want to be a part of multi-time state championship wrestling teams and cross-country teams and basketball teams and, you know, education, you know, standards that are going up, and our conference is crazy competitive, and, you know, we're competitive academically, we're competitive. And, you know, people want to say the community that I live in is growing and thriving and doing well. And I think you've absolutely done that, Mike, at Kaukauna. And it has been an honor to be along in the journey with you. And all of you out there that are leading and running organizations, really, I think, Mike, kind of the takeaways from this is we never know when we're making that deposit in someone's life. You know, look at where you are now, and it all started with a basketball coach who believed in you, who saw something in you. And not to say you wouldn't have been successful. You would have been likely successful. However, those deposits really help us on a different trajectory in our careers. So all of us know that when we can make those deposits, and you've certainly made those deposits in my life and in the life of my kiddos. I still have a junior still in the district who's thriving and doing well, and we love it here. So any final parting words for you, Mike, for those listening who are just wondering, what advice do you have for us to, because some people are going to say, oh, life's been easy for Mike Slowinski. He's got a wonderful family. He's got a beautiful home. Everything's going great. Everything's easy. Everything he touches just turns to gold. You know, what advice would you have for those watching on what it takes to lead at this level?
I think the biggest piece is just having the perseverance to make it through the noise, you know, in any sort of leadership role, but particularly in our school systems, that there's going to be a lot of opinions. And I think knowing who you are and what you value, and then trusting that in the biggest moments, is the way to be successful. And, you know, to some on the outside, like you said, maybe that appears one way, like it's easy. It's not, but it's being grounded, that when you get your back against the wall or you get knocked down, that you can look in the mirror and say, this is who I'm about. And when I have this tough decision to make, I know that I'm making it based on these values that have never changed. And I just think that's so important in our leaders. And for people who are looking at getting into education or maybe struggling within education right now, we need leaders more than ever in this world, you know, and to be we're so blessed to be in a position to be able to make those deposits for others. And sometimes we see the fruits of that immediately. And sometimes it happens 30 years later, where somebody, you know, recognizes that, hey, I had that person who's been in my corner this whole time. So it's the most amazing profession in the world. And I'm very grateful to be a part of it. So
Well,
I,
thanks so much for joining us, Mike. Love working with you and the team. Love the direction of the district, and can't wait to see what happens in the next chapter here. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for the Authentic Confidence Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Fauske, and Mike Slowinski has joined us as the Superintendent of Schools from Kaukauna Area School District, and he is crushing it. If any of you, want to reach out to him for advice and help, I'm sure he'd be happy to connect with you as well. And thank you so much, Mike, for joining us.
oh, thank you so much, Ben. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Take care.